Hi there, this is Power and Politics. I'm David Cochran in Huntsville, Ontario, where Canada's premiers are wrapping their three-day summit, hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst, as U.S. President Donald Trump cuts trade deals with other major countries.
We certainly need to ensure that we have lower tariffs than any other country.
We need to start diversifying our trade, sending our goods all around the world.
We will not drink their alcohol or visit their country until they quit it.
I mean, I'm watching Truth Social along with everyone else because things could change in 5 minutes.
They say they're united like never before, but the premiers are also deeply uncertain in the face of Trump's August 1st deadline. Will Canada get a deal? And if not, how will each province survive the threatened 35% tariff? We've got a number of premiers coming up, including...
But I wouldn't recommend the president going down that road. I'd be very, very cautious on what he tariffs and what he doesn't.
He doesn't mind playing bad cop to Prime Minister Mark Carney's good cop. Just ahead, our exclusive broadcast interview with Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who's got more tough talk for President Trump. Power and Politics starts right now. Canada's premiers are soon heading back to their home provinces and territories, not knowing what's in store for Canada's economy. After this week's briefing from Prime Minister Mark Carney, it remains unclear whether Canada will clinch a U.S. trade deal by August 1st. But for the last 3 days, the premiers hunkered down here in Ontario's cottage country to discuss possible outcomes and how to prepare for them. Doug Ford is the Premier of Ontario, and he joins me now. Premier Ford, welcome to Power and Politics. Good to have you, sir.
Well, thanks so much for having me on, David.
Well, since we've been here, there's been a lot of focus on the Canada-U.S. trade situation. But over the last couple of days, we've seen Japan reach a deal for a 15% tariff. There's reporting that the European Union is likely to agree to a 15% tariff. Are you worried that's where this is going now, that 15% is going to be the baseline with the U.S.?
Well, if we want to compare ourselves to Japan, Japan buys approximately $79 billion worth of products off of the U.S. We buy $359 billion. So we're 400% more, even higher than that actually, than what Japan purchased. So we're their largest customer. I've always said, David, we buy more products than China, Japan, Korea, UK, France together, and actually a lot more than Mexico as well.
But you know, I wonder, and look, you've talked about how unpredictable Donald Trump is. I'm not going to ask you to read his mind, but when you see 15%, and it's G7 countries, so it's the club we play in, you wonder if that is the mindset now in the United States, that maybe that's what they're going to want here. You worried?
Well, I'm always concerned with Donald Trump because he changes his mind every single day, it seems. But we don't have to take a backseat to anyone. We should never take a backseat to anyone in the world, especially a backseat to President Trump. We're an economic powerhouse around the world, and again, we're their #1 customer, and they need to start respecting their #1 customer.
What's your level of optimism that, if not resolution, at least some clarity and a bit more certainty is possible by the 1st of August?
Well, certainty is the word, because with certainty, people will invest, people will go out and spend, as simple as buying a home or start a business. But in saying that, just last year in 2024, foreign direct investment in Ontario was very high. It was 409 companies, totaling approximately $40 billion that they invested last year and created 25,000 jobs. So as long as we create the environment and the conditions for companies around the world to invest, they'll come here and invest. And that means getting rid of red tape, regulations, keeping taxes low, energy costs low, to be competitive around the world.
You know, there has been some conversation from various premiers, throughout the last couple of days that even if there is no deal by the 1st of August, the situation Canada finds itself is with a lower overall tariff rate and better access to the United States than most countries around the world. Now, it's still worse than it was on January 1, on August 1, if that's where we end up. Yeah. But those sector-specific tariffs, and the auto industry is critical for here in Ontario, the steel sector critical. I know it's true to say the number could be lower than the rest of the world, but auto is bleeding out. Steel is bleeding out. I mean, how long can it possibly last if those sectoral tariffs don't go away?
Well, we are the #1 purchaser of autos from the U.S. anywhere in the world. We buy over 400% more than Mexico, 200% more than anyone else in in the world. So he has to keep an eye on making sure, look at the numbers that we buy off the Americans and look at the content that we put into our vehicles. 50% of them, a lot of them are American parts. So he has to take that in consideration, or they're going to see a lot of Canadians buying anything but American cars, and the auto parts will be Canadian parts if he goes down that road. I wouldn't recommend the president going down that road, because every tariff on Canada is a tax on Americans. That's exactly what's going to happen. Anything built with steel, you've seen the cost go up 30% in the U.S., so I'd be very, very cautious on what he tariffs and what he doesn't. But we're going to onshore everything we possibly can, no matter if it's aluminum cans or I-beams or rebar.
Yeah, but as he does this harm to the U.S. economy, Drew Dilkins, the mayor of Windsor, was here, and unemployment in Windsor is into the double digits now, right? And if Flavio Volpe and others talk about the Stellantis plant, the Brampton plant, just not being able to survive if this persists.
Well, we're going to support Stellantis. We're going to support the Volkswagen plant, but we're strong. We're still strong. I'm a strong believer that we're resilient. We have the smartest, brightest people in the entire world. What I'm hearing from a lot of auto part companies that are Canadian-based but have facilities in the U.S., they can't even get people to show up 5 days a week. They can't even get people to hire, have enough people to hire. Their unemployment's 4.1%. So when I asked Secretary Lutnick, where are you going to get the people? Well, we'll bring in 5 million people. Okay, well, you're bringing in 5 million people, you're probably shipping out 10 million too.
Right. While you're dealing with this external challenge, the internal challenges that we often saw at these meetings, we're not really seeing at these meetings, right? You had a sleepover with the Prime Minister, which is not something we've ever seen at a Council of the Federation meeting. Is it just the change in leadership in Ottawa and the threat of Donald Trump that has changed this, or has something changed at the Premier's table as well?
A little mixture of both, but for the most part, it's a change of having a new Prime Minister, a business-minded Prime Minister that understands what he needs to do, and we just all get along. We all have a common cause to drive the economy, make sure we're the most prosperous, wealthiest country in the G7.
You did talk about a few issues, though, at the closing press conference that are points of friction: immigration, disagreement there on provincial nominees and the ratio of economic immigrants that are part of the program, health transfers. Are these potential fault lines where this sort of Team Canada unity could potentially start to fray?
I don't think so. I look at it as we're helping the federal government on immigration. They're so backlogged. And by the way, it's not just the previous government in 10 years or Prime Minister Carney's issue. This has been going on for decades. It takes 2 years to get a permit, so these folks that want to work, contribute to society, are stuck in a hotel room and not being able to contribute. We need to get them a work permit, and we're there to support them and work side by side with the federal government.
You're worried about getting into a legal fight with the federal government over that if you issue permits for people who haven't been approved to work in Canada?
No, as long as they go through their security checks, so on and so forth, they want to work. We can't leave them sitting up on Airport Road in Etobicoke North doing absolutely nothing. I've talked to these folks. They want to work. They want to contribute. Right. Let's get them out there paying taxes, contributing to society.
Just one last question, Premier, because I know you got to go. You became the chair of the Council of the Federation at a very interesting time. I don't know if you signed up for a continental trade war when it became Ontario's turn, and you took a front and center role in that. You've handed the baton now to Rob Lantz, the Premier of Prince Edward Island. How does your approach on this change? Do you view it differently? Do you approach it differently, or you just keep going?
Well, we're going to keep going, but I've told Premier Lantz we're there for him. We're going to support him. We have the largest population, we have the largest economy, we have the largest land mass, 1,070,000 square kilometers, but we're there. And I've always had a stance since I've been Premier. I'm going to help all the provinces. I've always said we're going to help the smaller provinces, and that's what we're going to do. To give Ontarians a perspective, we give the federal government $25 billion more than what we get back. So that's equalization, but I have no problem taking care of the smaller provinces that need a hand.
Will you be as front and center in the trade issues now that you're no longer chair? Yeah?
Absolutely, I will be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Premier Doug Ford, it's good to have you on the show. Thanks for your time today, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We just heard from the current Council of the Federation chair, but Premier Doug Ford is handing over the baton to a new Premier, and joining me now is the Premier of Prince Edward Island, Rob Lantz. Premier, it's good to see you, sir.
Great to be here.
How are you feeling as you step into this leadership role and none of the trade uncertainty has been resolved?
Well, you know, I think the role is a big responsibility regardless of the circumstances. But, you know, I'm a relatively new premier. It's only 6 months on the job or so, but I've had the opportunity now to be at 2 FMN meetings in person. This was to be a COF meeting, but essentially turned into an FMN with Carney being here. So, you know, I've quickly become familiar with the issues and gotten to know my fellow premiers, and so, you know, I'm ready to take over the job, but yeah, it's a daunting task.
We've all had to get very familiar with the issues of trade and tariffs, and, you know, because of Donald Trump, he sort of forced this upon us. And we've seen over the last couple of days, Japan agreeing to a 15% tariff, Europe agreeing, reportedly, to a 15% tariff. We don't know where it's going to end up with Canada, but when you see that 15% hitting countries that are part of the G7, part of NATO, countries that are very similar to Canada economically, are you worried that that's where the U.S. wants us to go?
Well, you know, I hope not. And, you know, I've been watching your interviews with the other premiers on this network and others, and I've heard what everybody's had to say. Obviously, you're probably not going to hear a lot novel from me, but I guess everyone's talking about this challenge of coming to a comprehensive deal by August 1st and what that's going to look like. But I don't. The nature of Donald Trump is that you're probably never finished negotiating. Whatever happens August 1st will probably continue to be an ongoing drama that we'll have to deal with going forward. And at this point, who knows if it ends with Donald Trump? I think the U.S. is, in particular the Republican Party, has really adopted his style of politics and a posture towards Canada that may outlast him even. So we need to get used to it. And you know, right now that the effective tariff rate on the country we know is relatively low. It's higher than it was, but probably lower than some of these deals that are being made. And it's really the sectoral tariffs that are causing great concern. And probably, you know, your audience may assume that's like the steel and auto tariffs wouldn't affect Prince Edward Island directly, but they do. We have a lot of exposure to steel prices. Per capita steel consumption in PEI is actually quite high in our manufacturing sector. So,
you're also pretty trade exposed as a province, right? A lot of your product goes to the United States. The New England states in particular are an important market for Prince Edward Island. I mean, the persistent hit to your core industries, I know we want to preach patience, and that's what certainly the Prime Minister and the other premiers have all preached, because you have to be patient with President Trump, and who knows what will happen August 1. But what has been the knock-on effect in your province? And you know, if this goes on for another 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, where are we?
Well, Prince Edward Island has developed a real trading economy, really expanded our export economy over recent decades. Some very important industries that we've built from the ground up. It's not just a resource-based economy as it traditionally was. But largely we're CUSMA compliant. So, you know, we've set in our budget in the spring, we set aside a $30 million contingency fund we haven't had to dip into yet.
Well, that's the key thing, is whatever the tariffs are, if the CUSMA carve-outs exist, you're going to probably be okay.
Yeah, and we talked about that. That's very, very important. Carney is well aware of that, that's a priority to maintain that CUSMA carve-out. But right now, you know, it's still just a lot of anxiety, not a lot of real-world effects. But what we are feeling is some trickle-down effects from our counter tariffs. So there's a lot of inputs in manufacturers and food processing and things that we use in Prince Edward Island that are costing us more because of our own tariffs on U.S. products.
So this is one of the questions, right? The calibration of the response that, you know, Doug Ford has wanted to go dollar for dollar. Others are saying you need to be more careful because, you know, it's a circular firing squad once you start doing tariffs and counter tariffs. What's your advice to the Prime Minister there in terms of what he should do? Because there is a gut desire by a lot of Canadians to hit back, but then, as you say, you're hurting your own people.
Yeah, I think from the very first time, it was a virtual meeting, but it would have been an FMM with Trudeau, I think, when I first landed in the seat. And I asked the question, like, what's the game plan here with counter tariffs? I said this to my own residents in Prince Edward Island, that we've got, you know, Donald Trump we often talked about Donald Trump and tariffs, that he didn't understand them, that they were actually attacks on his own people. So I've always said we've got to be very honest that our counter tariffs are attacks on our own people. So let's be careful, use them wisely, strategically. We've got to have chips on the table to bargain with, but we also don't want to unduly burden ourselves.
So if they do it, they need to be very targeted and very
That's
careful.
my position. It always has been, and I continually ask, what is the strategy with the counter tariffs? I'm not sure I fully understand, but I do understand the need to have chips on the table that we can use for bargaining. Yeah.
It sounds like it depends on wherever they land, right? That it'll be kind of proportional or something. Is that your sense as well?
Yeah, that's the sense I get. Yeah.
Right. So this, I guess, is the final point. I guess this would be technically day one as chair of the Council of the Federation?
I guess it is, yeah.
Right, so you do this for a year until you host the premiers in Charlottetown, and then as I understand it, it goes to the Northwest Territory, so Premier Simpson would succeed you. Yeah. Do you think this is resolved with the U.S. by the time you hand the baton to Premier Simpson?
We talked about that a little bit, and as I alluded to with you earlier, I think this issue with the U.S. and trade may outlast Donald Trump. Donald Trump's done us somewhat of a favor by giving us a common problem that we can focus on, and it's really created that unity that you've heard all about from all the other premiers. And I joked with our premiers, and it's like here I am taking on this chair of COF, and my greatest fear is that we resolve all these problems and then we turn back on each other and that unity disappears and I've got to manage that for the next year. I don't think that's going to happen. I really think Carney's cooperative relationship with us, his recognition that we should be at the table and we can have an impact, we can help him with his agenda and he with ours. He's recognized that, and that's based on some of his past experiences, some of the tables that he's sat on,
right.
G7 and banks and so on and so forth.
But you think
that
it can
experience
endure?
is translating well, and I think that should endure. And that would be my challenge, to make sure that that cooperative nature endures, and I hope that it endures beyond my tenure there as well. I think that this serves the nation well to have that cooperative relationship.
Okay. Rob Lantz, Premier of Prince Edward Island, incoming chair of the Council of Federation. Thanks for your time, sir. Appreciate it. Still to come, the premiers are united in the face of uncertainty, but how long can all of that last? The Power Panel joins me with their takeaways from the premiers' summer meeting. But first, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says we need to keep our eye on the long game when it comes to the United States. Scott Moe joins me next. Canada's premiers have wrapped up 3 days of meetings that was mainly focused on the ongoing trade dispute with the United States. The deadline for those talks is now just a little over a week away. But Manitoba Premier Rob Lantz said today the date of a deal isn't what is most important.
It's really important for Canada to get a good deal rather than rushing to take any deal, including one that might harm us in the long term. I think our kids and grandkids are going to look back at this time as an inflection point where we had the opportunity to stand up for our nation's independence.
Scott Moe is the Premier of Saskatchewan. Premier, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you.
Well, what's your level of comfort that we'll have some clarity or resolution with the United States by August? It seems like we've accepted it's not going to happen, and it's just going to be a persistent state of affairs.
Yeah, we need to really keep the the long game and what our goal is when it comes to our discussions with the United States, because things are changing at times on a daily or hourly basis, and it's important for us to understand that we do have a trade deal that is in place today, and we're negotiating, what a renewal of that or a revamp of that might look like in what is, very quick changing, quick moving and challenging environment.
We've seen just since the premiers have been here in Huntsville that Japan has ended up, look, we don't know the fine print of any of this, right? So the devil is in the details, but it looks like a 15% tariff for Japan. There's reports in the Financial Times that the European Union is going to agree to a 15% tariff. Are you worried the baseline with America is just going to be 15%, which is a heck of a lot higher where we've been?
Well, I think my hope would be zero, but we have to be less than everyone else, just in the interest of economic security, not just for the U.S. and Canada, but for our continent. And if we truly are concerned as North Americans of our, the economic, the fuel, the food security, the manufacturing security, the economic security that we have, ultimately utilizing that to invest in our general security, we're going to have to be less than that. So preferably zero, and I think zero should still be the target. That's what we have now with the USMCA agreement. But we'll leave those negotiations to the federal government in the days and weeks ahead.
Yeah, but less than 15% could still be pretty bad, right? I mean, it feels like the situation we're in. I mean, is there a number that is simply an unacceptable level? Like, is it 10? Is it 8? Like, because certain industries like auto probably can't survive numbers like that.
No, and that's why we need to be negotiating from a space where we push it down as low as possible, simply because of the integration that we have across the border. And listen, I've long been a voice saying that when President Trump puts a tariff on Canadian products that are heading to the U.S., that has a financial impact negatively on American families and American industries. It pushes costs up for Americans. And so, the closer we are to zero, the better for America, the better for Canada, and I would say the better for North America.
Daniel Smith said at the closing press conference today that if there's a deal on the sectoral tariffs by August 1, she'd consider that a win, and then you move on and negotiate on CUSMA, probably starting in 2026. Do you think we should hope for anything on sectoral tariffs by August 1? It seems like that win may not be there.
I think I'd be less bullish on the date and more concerned about the content of the agreement. As I said, we have an operational agreement now. However, there are some challenges in certain sectors around that, impacting Saskatchewan as well, I might add. But we do need a strong agreement moving forward if we are to achieve what our goals are out into the future.
Right. It seems, though, quite possible there could be nothing on August 1. That is just whatever the president puts on social media, and then Canada has to scramble to adapt to it. I mean, how do you think the country needs to approach it in a circumstance like that? Well,
I think they're approaching it in the right way. I think Dominic LeBlanc was here, met with us yesterday, and then was off to Washington, D.C. And he certainly, I think, is the voice for our government to have in D.C. alongside the Prime Minister. And so whether it be the U.S. or other markets around the world that are of importance to Saskatchewan and Canada, like China, the Prime Minister is engaging and really prioritizing the credibility that Canada has on the global stage with global leaders, including President Trump. And so, credit to him for that. We need to keep it up.
President Trump has really injected an urgency and a focus, I would argue, into the political agenda and the economic focus of the Canadian leadership class. But he also seems to have just sucked all of the partisanship out of it. You and I have been at a lot of these conferences together. This is very different, Premier. Like, there is no factions, there is no disagreement, there's none of the proxy war stuff we saw in the past. I mean, is that just a feature of the moment, or do you think this is something that can persist?
Both. I think when you look at the Council of Federation, and this is probably my 7th or 8th meeting, the Council of Federation has often been able to work through partisan differences that we might have. I think of, former Premier Horgan or Andrew Furey around the table. Not of the political stripe I might be, but we found points of consensus. And so the Council of Federation table certainly has been able to achieve that. What we see and what I see, I would speak for myself with Prime Minister Carney, is an individual that is, very much engaging with the provinces on where we might land as Canadians, and is bringing, I think, a wealth of common sense to the conversation. And he has some priorities, and you're starting to see those play out. Trade is a priority, increasing the effort that he is making and his government is making for Canadian credibility in the global atmosphere, the global environment, and I credit him for that. That's something we've always been focused on at the provincial level, and I think that's all we've been asking for is that very mature conversation and collaboration with the premiers on how can we do best by Canadians that we collectively represent them all.
But just as a final point, Premier, if you look ahead with this uncertainty, there's going to be some rough times, quite probably economically. Like, a lot of jobs have already been lost. A lot more are pretty close to slipping under. And there is going to be a political impulse at different levels, federally, wherever, to blame them and to start trying to capitalize on these struggles rather than solve them. If and when that kind of a dynamic unfolds, do you think this can last? I mean, what role do premiers then play in trying to hold it all together?
That will definitely happen as we have global trade challenges, tariff discussions, counter-tariff discussions, if we don't change how we do business in Canada. Here's the trump card, if I could use that Canadians have, is if we drastically change the regulatory environment so that we can attract investment, create jobs, have the construction and expansion of our industries. Right. That's the opportunity, and so the challenges are easily identified by yourself and many others. There is an opportunity in here, unlike I have seen in over a decade, for Canada and Canadians to really capitalize on. But it is going to require some of the change internally in what we do as a nation, what we do as provinces. And, I'm cautiously optimistic that I see Prime Minister Carney and his government, looking very seriously at making those changes, changing the regulatory environment to have the investment dollars come into Canada. That is my hope, is that we as Canadians have the opportunity over the next number of months and years to truly capitalize on some of the uncertainty that we're seeing globally, is for Canada to come in and be a beacon of certainty in that environment.
So the test isn't necessarily what happens with Trump, as important as that is. It's whether you deliver on what you're promising internally, the things you can't control.
Both are important. Yeah. Both are important. You hear premiers coming out of Western Premiers meeting and the First Ministers meeting in Saskatoon talking about a port-to-port corridor, opening up Asian and European markets. That's aside and in addition to whatever we can achieve with the United States of America. And so there is opportunities in all of this, but we have to change the way we do things and make it more real and more possible.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, always appreciate the time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Premiers ended this week's meeting united in their focus on getting big things done, with the shared goal of defending Canada against threats from the United States. They were also united in their praise for a colleague who will soon be leaving his post as Premier.
He's been a huge champion of Northern sovereignty, Arctic sovereignty. Thank you so much, PJ, for your work for the country. It's been amazing.
The Premier of Nunavut, PJ Akeeagok, joins me now. Premier, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, always nice seeing you, David.
This is probably going to be one of your last First Ministers meetings because you've decided not to run again. You have an election in the fall. Yeah. What's your sense of where Canada's leaders are right now in terms of dealing with what's happening with the U.S.?
Well, it gives me so much sense of pride. You look across from coast to coast to coast. There's so much unity. So I really am leaving with that pride, knowing that we're in really good hands. I think Premier Ford, as just the chair that just gave it to my good friend Rob, did an incredible job making sure that all the voices from across this country are there. So I really want to take the moment to acknowledge his leadership that really brought us all together during a very important time that we're in. The threat that we see from the United States is real. And for us to stand together, to stand united, couldn't be more important than it is now. And as a Premier for Nunavut, it's really been my honor to represent Inuit, but also to represent Canada. I think there's so much solutions we have, so much that we have to offer the world, just right within ourselves, but we have to build from within.
Right.
And I think we've really brought some of those conversations around the table here, both at the First Ministers meeting, but also at the Council of Federations as well.
At all of these forums, you've talked a lot about Arctic security, Arctic sovereignty, Arctic development, dual purpose infrastructure spending. And now as we move into the major project conversation, you've talked about the importance of Indigenous participation. And in the case of the projects you've put forward, Inuit are actually the proponents here. But there has been a skepticism and a frustration around C5 and the legislation. The Prime Minister's off to Inuvik. He's going to meet with Netan Obed and the ITK and other Inuit leaders. Are you satisfied that the national government is doing what it needs to do to ensure that the concerns are alleviated here?
Oh, absolutely. In Nunavut, there's certainty. We've worked and identified the nation-building projects with Nunavut Tungavik, which is the land claims organization that's the rights holders. So I truly believe we're in a different situation in Nunavut. We've purposefully selected these nation-building with Inuit being the proponents. They are being led by Inuit for Inuit that really will have the true the benefit for the country. You look at the major projects that we brought forward right from the beginning that fit and align so well on the national interests. You look at the Arctic Security Corridor, the Grays Bay Road and Port, which I brought up so many times, because it's so important. We are at a moment where infrastructure gap between the north and south is huge. And we really got to start asserting and actually start investing in the north to assert our sovereignty. And that one project in particular aligns so well when you talk about wanting to build the backbone of our economy by opening up and diversifying our trade. Where from that perspective, there's so much opportunity around critical minerals, but also having a lot more presence in terms of the Canadian Armed Forces.
So, we did see at the summit with the AFN a lot of skepticism from a lot of First Nations chiefs. You're Inuk. What is your sense of where the Inuit are in terms of trusting the federal government? Because Netan Obed was frustrated with the C5 process. Do you think broadly Inuit are going to be on board?
Time will tell. I know the Prime Minister is just meeting with the leadership with Akeeagok Tungaluk, Akeeagok Obed, with the whole ITK board tomorrow. I know they will have a very constructive but very progressive conversation. I've been engaging with President Obed as well as Akeeagok Tungaluk throughout this whole process. I think it's so important to ensure that lines of communications are always there. We've always had an open door policy in terms of advancing some of these really exciting projects. It was very selective of us to select Inuit-led projects because Section 35 is so important. The Indigenous rights are so important and they're embedded in the Constitution. So from that perspective, I think we're very thankful for their leadership because it is their projects that we're advancing. And we've had very positive conversations with the Prime Minister just a few days ago with the First Nations here, as well as other Indigenous organizations, where I think there's an openness and a willingness to be able to have these very meaningful conversations where I think everyone just wants to be treated with respect. And they want to be given the opportunity to bring their projects forward, which really could open up their prosperity as we move forward. So in Nunavut, we're, I think, in a different situation where we already have robust regulatory systems. We've pushed Inuit-led, Inuit-driven projects that fit the definition of national significance. And so I feel very optimistic that the meeting with the Prime Minister that we just had with the First Ministers was very positive. Arctic security and sovereignty is top of mind. And I think the Prime Minister gets the importance of needing to invest in the North. And I look forward to hearing the outcomes of the meeting that he will be having with ITK.
So just as a quick final point, you've decided not to run again. You're going to leave politics, maybe. Well, certainly in Charlottetown next year, there will be a different premier of Nunavut. What are you going to do next? Is there a role for you in this northern development space that, on the areas we've been talking about, that you might do as a post-political career?
You know, this really has been the honor of my life, to be able to serve Nunavut, to be able to serve Canada. So I really want to thank the people who brought me here, but also in particular to my wife and my children, who's I feel so thankful for really the support that I've been given. But yeah, there's nothing I'm actually prepared to jump into. Right now I'm really focused to keep pushing to the last minute that I am here on advancing these really exciting Inuit-led projects that really will have a huge impact to our territory. A lot of these projects have been in the visions for decades, and I think we are at a moment where we have the support of Canadians from coast to coast, and that we have to stop just talking about it and actually land some of these major investments moving forward. So I do leave feeling very optimistic that there's going to be some really exciting things happening, not only in Nunavut, but right across the north in Canada. But very much will always play a supporting role in advancing that Team Canada. I've been there right from the beginning since I've taken this role. But I feel so passionate about being a Canadian that comes from the most smallest but most northern community in North America. So from that perspective, very much look forward to and following and supporting that Team Canada moving forward.
Nunavut Premier, PJ Akeeagok, thank you so much for your time, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, David.
The premiers say they're leaving their summer meetings united, but with economic threats from the United States far from over, how long can that unity last? We're going to talk to the Power Panel about the state of play as the premiers head home. That's next. Canada's premiers have wrapped 3 days of talks in Ontario's cottage country, and in the face of economic threats from south of the border, there was a show of unity and a loud message of defiance, particularly from the host of the meeting.
We're an economic powerhouse, folks. We don't have to take a backseat to anyone, and we sure the heck don't have to take a backseat to Donald Trump.
I don't trust President Trump as far as I can throw.
If President Trump increases tariffs, this is my personal opinion, I don't speak on behalf of COF, we need to make sure we match tariff by tariff, dollar for dollar, and hit them back as hard as we possibly can. It's not the American people, it's not the elected officials, it's one guy. That's President Trump is the problem. You know what Churchill said, our enemy of our enemy is our friend, and I don't consider Americans enemy, but right now President Trump himself is acting like the enemy.
But as the premiers met, the U.S. was striking up trade deals with other nations, deals that signal a 15% baseline tariff could be the norm. So is that maybe the best Canada can expect from a deal? The Power Panel is here to talk about the state of play as the premiers head home. Jordan Leichnitz is a former NDP strategist. Tim Powers has worked as a strategist for Conservative parties, and Karleen Verheyen is a former chief of staff to Liberal cabinet ministers. Good to see you all, gang. We know there is going to be a 15% tariff for Japan. They've agreed to that. There are reports of a 15% tariff, Tim, being negotiated with the European Union. We don't know what the bottom line is yet, but it could be a baseline of 15%. What do you make of that potential development?
Well, I'd say two things are interesting coming out of the meeting. To hear Doug Ford bring his language up a bit again, David. When he did that last time, he seemed to get a reaction from Commerce Secretary Lutnick and others, and that seemed to have some progress. So probably a very deliberate strategy. It doesn't hurt that he's saying it either. The Prime Minister can't really say that in negotiations. The other thing is, yeah, you're right. Japan's got a deal, apparently, with the tariff number you talked about, 15%, and there the EU as well. But there seemed to be a lot of messaging today coming out that we're not going to, doesn't look likely we'll get a deal by August 1st. How one would interpret that depends on what Donald Trump says at any moment on Truth Social. But that may be a sign that we are either in a truly uncertain place or a place where we may be a bit better off. By that I mean, if they're not coming out in the same time frame with the same numbers, let's choose to be optimistic until we need to be pessimistic.
Right. Well, you know, Karleen, no deal by August 1st is that no deal was agreed to, no deal that Canada could accept. Trump just decided he's going to set an arbitrary tariff rate, and that's just the way it goes. I mean, it could mean any number of things. And while there is a bit of a pessimism here, there is also patience, it seems, with the premiers to take a deep breath, try to get the good deal, and rally behind the Prime Minister.
Because Canada is in a position where it can afford to be patient. The most important thing that we can remember that is true about Canada that is not necessarily true for other countries is no deal is better than a bad deal. Yeah. And you heard the Prime Minister and several premiers say that today. Let's look at Japan as an example. Japan's got a deal today, allegedly. Japan was in a very different bargaining position than Canada is in. There's a lot more pressure on them to get a deal because they don't have the same purchasing power. They don't represent as large of a customer base for the U.S. in terms of the U.S.'s exports as Canada does. So I don't think that it's necessarily a useful or apt comparison to watch other countries get deals and feel that that puts pressure on Canada to need to move. We don't need to move. We have a lot of the cards in this conversation. That's just as true today as it was in January and February when this conversation first started. And you just think back to those first principles. Canada is a bigger customer for U.S. businesses than I think it's Japan, Korea, the UK, France, and Mexico combined. So we got a lot of leverage here.
Yeah, Jordan, I don't necessarily look at these deals and think, oh, well, Canada's got to give. I look at these deals and wonder, does this mean President Trump is looking at 15% as his bare minimum? Because yes, while Canada has greater purchasing power, the economic exposure and the vulnerability is also larger and more acute too.
Yeah, that's right. Of course, Canada is really alone alongside Mexico in terms of our vulnerability to these tariffs. And I think that that's why it's really difficult to compare other G7 countries and other deals like we've seen also signed by the UK in addition to Japan. because the impact on our economy is just so much more significant if we were to sign an agreement that allowed any level of tariffs to be baked in. And I think it's really notable that we've seen the Prime Minister move over the last couple of weeks from sort of preconditioning the population to the idea that tariffs may be a more permanent thing, some level of tariffs, to now taking a firmer line that there will not be a signature on an agreement if it's not good for Canada. I think there's a lot of really good reasons that that second approach is the right one, because of course once we sign an agreement that does contain some level of tariffs, that becomes a bit of a new normal, and it also limits our ability to counter tariff, to fight back from some of those things. And of course we just went through an election where Canadians demonstrated, I think really vividly, that they were ready for that fight.
Yeah, and whatever concession you agree to now on this August 1 deadline, it just becomes the starting point for the broader trade renegotiation next year. Look, I'm going to do something that's deeply unfair to the three of you. I'm going to play a clip of Donald Trump and ask you to tell me what it means, because he just gave a bit of insight into his tariff policy and the trade deals the U.S. is signing just last hour at an event in Washington. So take a listen to this.
We're going to have a very, very simple tariff for some of the countries. We have so many countries, you can't negotiate deals with everyone, so we'll have a straight, simple tariff of anywhere between 15 and 50%. A couple we have 15 because we haven't been getting along with those countries too well, so we just say, let's pay 50.
So, Tim, I don't know who pays 50, who pays 15, who he's getting along with, who he's not getting along with. But, you know, go back to Jordan's point about the preconditioning from the Prime Minister that tariffs are going to be some sort of a persistent thing. Yeah, it seems pretty clear, no matter what, something like that is going to happen to every economy out there.
Well, and you also had, David, which I found really fascinating, I think it was on the weekend, Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary for Bill Clinton, former president of Harvard, saying that, you know, there was, I want to get this right, but suggesting there was something in the tariff policies that Trump was putting out there that had some effectiveness. So in an odd way, Trump is getting a little space. However, to your question about the numbers, look, who knows what his range is, because we've also had 25% out there. We've had 35% out there. It's varied among sectors. I don't think Donald Trump himself knows. I think it's his straight up typical real estate negotiating ploy, numbers floating all over the place. He's hoping you will guide him to a place, and then he'll see if he likes it, and then you go from there. That's pretty common in real estate. Gives us no comfort, but you know, let's see where we go, because it could all change again soon. And it has to be said that some of this obviously has to be pretty diversionary, given some of the allegations being made domestically in the United States about Epstein and Trump and all of this, because every time Jeffrey Epstein's name, the list gets brought up, there's more noise on the tariff front, there's more attacks at other people. So if you're a Canadian negotiator, God bless you, because I don't know how you follow the bouncing ball around.
Well, you know, Carleen, it was interesting. With all of this chaos and all of this pressure and all of this turmoil coming from externally from the United States, there was none of that here in Huntsville, in the Muskokas. I've been to a lot of premiers' conferences and first ministers' meetings in my day, and this unity and cohesion, it was remarkable in the face of everything, just how Canada's leaders are kind of pulling together in this moment. What did it look like to you from the outside here?
I mean, it makes you wonder what the Prime Minister is saying to those premiers once that door shuts, doesn't it? Because every single one of them comes out, and not just today, but the last time they met too, every single one of them comes out effusive in their praise and falling over themselves to express their confidence in the Prime Minister, and not just like-minded premiers from progressive parties, but conservative premiers. I mean, two of his biggest cheerleaders right now, I think we would say, would be Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston, both of whom are Conservative premiers. But we also heard just a few minutes ago on your show from my Premier Scott Moe, who spoke with great confidence about the Prime Minister and Minister Dominic LeBlanc as well. I think there's two things going on. One, the premiers are likely seeing a level of confidence and competence from the Prime Minister in those meetings behind closed doors that they like, that makes them feel good. And number two, I think all of these people are politicians, and they recognize something, which is that when they are up against a person like President Trump, who his signature move is to try to divide people in order to dominate them, that they cannot show an ounce of daylight between their positions. That unity is the biggest asset that we have right now as Canadians, and they're all doing their part. You saw that earlier in June at the First Minister's meeting. You saw that today. I think as Canadians, we should hope that we continue to see that for as long as this takes.
Right. You know, Jordan, we interviewed 10 of the premiers on the show over the last couple of days and talked to basically all of them, you know, sort of off air in the hallways of the meetings. And on this unity front, they all say that essentially the Prime Minister respects them and impresses them. And that makes it easy to sort of be on, you know, to get behind him in this particular moment. And it is notable in the change, but I do wonder about its durability as things do start to get harder, because that is always the challenge in a country like this.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Look, right now, there's no question that I think the premiers are doing what a lot of Canadians are doing, which is giving Prime Minister Carney a whole lot of latitude in doing what he needs to do in these negotiations. But we're still at a place where it's not clear what the trade-offs are going to be in the negotiations. And part of the challenge about the tariff threat, the way Trump has presented it to Canada, is it's so sectoral. He's going after key industries like auto, like steel, like aluminum that have regional bases. And so that means that when eventually there is a deal, when there's discussions around what those trade-offs are going to be, there's going to be serious regional political ramifications. So you could think, for example, about what happens if supply management were to, in a serious way, be on the table. So I think that those conversations are necessarily going to become more difficult as it becomes clearer what is involved in those trade-offs. But for now, right now, it makes complete sense for the premiers to be supportive of Prime Minister Carney in order to strengthen his hand in those negotiations. I think what's interesting coming out of President Trump is that you almost get the sense that he's a little less interested in reaching deals, or he's getting a little impatient with the process. And so I think it continues to be a challenge for the Canadians to get Canada on the agenda in the Oval Office in order to get to a conclusion. Because there's a lot of noise, there's a lot going on there domestically, as Tim has also talked about, that's politically unfavorable for the president. And so he likes to talk about tariffs because that's something that's working for him.
But, you know, Tim, it's interesting on the way the first ministers are kind of pulling together here. When I chatted with Scott Moe earlier, there is a sense that what happens with Trump, yes, it needs to succeed, it needs to work well, but so much of it is just beyond the Prime Minister's control that they understand that. Where the things could fall apart is if the domestic agenda doesn't hold, right? The big projects, the internal trade, the economic growth. And in that, in a lot of ways, is the sort of thing that could keep this knit together even if things go bad with the U.S.
Yeah, today's hero can be tomorrow's piñata. And traditionally at those meetings, you've seen a lot of that piñata getting whacked by premiers, as you well know, David. I mean, I think there's two other things here too, right? There is a broad public climate that's saying we want to see the Prime Minister and the premiers work well together. We like what we're seeing. Also in that data, there's evidence that Canadians are in a honeymoon phase with the Prime Minister. They still have confidence in him. They prefer him to other political leaders quite significantly. No one wants to step off outside of that. They also don't want to step off outside because there's no off-ramp for them. Donald Trump is the off-ramp, and everybody needs to be on the same road crashing into him right now. They can't turn off, because if one of them proposed to do a side deal, look at the grief Danielle Smith got around her oil musing and all of that. That didn't play well. They're all in this together in the car, waiting for the airbag to crash. Just depend who the driver is, I guess.
Well, you know, Carlene, we got about 45 seconds left, but on that, that frantic sort of kinetic thing that we saw in the early days of this, with Doug Ford saying, let's cut out Mexico, Danielle Smith going to Mar-a-Lago, none of that's there now. It is coherent and pulled together, because I think they've all recognized there is no threshold of appeasement you can magically get to acting as an individual. It's got to be a team.
Yep. I think all of the premiers and the Prime Minister as well have increasingly recognized that this is going to be a long game. At the beginning, we didn't know if this could be resolved in some way in 30, 60, 90 days. At this point, we're looking at this formal start of renegotiations of the Canada-USMCA only a year away and thinking, gee, that's not so long to wait. Maybe we're better off holding out. So I think that the biggest realization that has sunk in for these political leaders is that playing the long game sometimes means holding back a few of your cards a little bit longer.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. I have a feeling, though, that we'll all be talking about Donald Trump, the premiers, and the Prime Minister in the not-too-distant future. I want to thank you all, Jordan Leichtman, Tim Powers, and Carleen Varayan. And I am David Cochran. Thank you all for watching Power and Politics today and every other day. We're back in Ottawa on Thursday for the next edition of the show, but stay where you are because there's more coverage coming up right here on CBC News Network, so stay right there.